Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm just going to give it a moment to get everybody connected to the session. I'm going to share some slides with you. Okay, so Ava, you're here with me, my dear colleague, Ava. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, great. Okay.
I'm fine, I'm here.
Good. So I believe all the participants are on mute. So if you do have questions, please do use the chat here in the Zoom tool. And we'd be happy to take your questions at the end of the session. So Ava and I are going to work together I'm going to present and Ava's going to help me with the guiding questions. So I hope everybody's in, you can hear me clearly. It's a pleasure to be here today, and it's great to see such a diverse group of participants from Austria, but I've seen some other countries like Moldova, I see France was listed, Belgium, so it's really great to see such a turnout. So I'll dive right into the presentation. My intention is to spend about 15 to 20 minutes on the institutional perspective specifically, and then leave maybe 10 minutes for questions here in our breakout session. Afterwards, we'll all be brought back, as Ingrid just mentioned, into the main room, where we will continue with a further Q&A from all the presentations that have been held this morning. Again, if you want to stop me, Ava, I look to you as my guiding line as we go through the slides.
Don't worry, it's fine.
Okay, great. So I've been introduced. I'm going to speak about the institutional perspective for Sequent specifically. So I'm really presenting Sequent today as a benchmark for quality, but also a very valuable tool for effective strategic leadership, operational excellence, and an opportunity or a tool to develop the goals and aspirations of your institution. I'm also aware we have a very diverse group on the meeting call today, and I'm giving some examples from my time as a Sequent manager at Maastricht University, which is a very advanced, I would say, leading international university. But I really think from my experience, Sequent is a great tool for this idea of effective strategic leadership, but also on the operational side, getting into the data, getting into the details, the processes, and all that good stuff. Key to the process of developing your goals as an institution, we're really speaking about internationalization and quality. So as we've been hearing in the presentations this morning, this marriage or this idea of the two coming together. And all this is done in the process through the guidance of a self-evaluation report, which is really the baseline of the Sequent process. So in speaking about the institutional perspective, there are 5 main standards that are involved in this process. And I have them here on my slide. So the first, as we've heard a bit about today, is the intended internationalization. And I think from my experience of managing this process, I think this is probably the most important point, because it's really the starting point. And it's really about your intention, your ambitions as an institution when it comes to internationalization. So this is really, really key. So intended internationalization, then we follow on with action plans, goals. So it's kind of like you have your strategy, you have your idea, but then you need these plans to show how you're going to implement or how you're going to do what you're saying you're going to do. The third and fourth point, which Machai touched on in his presentation, is really the implementation and enhancement. So you have your strategy, you have your plans, but how do you implement these? If you look at the different information systems, how do you manage your data? How do you manage your processes? How do you maybe manage your people in your institution? And as you work through this process to get things up and running, it's really about enhancement then. So how do you ensure that this is a smooth or maybe a well-oiled machine to some degree? And then the last point, bringing us to governance. So governance, really, who's responsible for what? How effective is this system of governance for internationalization and quality at your institution? So these are the 5 standards, and I want to just emphasize these because I really see them as a baseline in going through the institutional perspective with Sequent. And having managed this process at Maastricht University over a 2-year period, this was really, I would say, the baseline from which I also worked to bring the university through this process. So it's good to familiarize yourself with these key points. So in moving on to give maybe a first perspective, I really wanted to emphasize that the self-evaluation is key. Because this is really, as I've mentioned on my first slide, it's about strategic approach, effective leadership when it comes to internationalization and quality. And so the self-evaluation really revolves a genuine reflection, I would say, looking back at the work of your institution in these areas, a look at the current status, so how are things going currently, but also the discussion about the future direction and aspirations. A decision, so a key perspective would be that it involves a decision for internationalization and quality and addressing key questions in this process. So there was a very interesting question in one of the previous sessions, like what is the purpose of Sequent? And I think in looking at the self-evaluation aspect, this is really key. So yes, you can use the result if you're a certified institution, but you can also use it as an internal quality measure to really address these kinds of points that I've listed here. An important point I wanted to highlight as well is that one size does not fit all. And I think this links very much to the intended internationalization. What are the ambitions of your institution? And that will vary greatly depending on many factors like size, student population, diversity, perhaps location, geographical. So it's very important that your goals and your ambitions are aligned with your abilities, resources, strengths as an institution. What I like about Sequent, having gone through this process, is that it really aims to assess, enhance and reward internationalization. So it's really about helping you get better about what you stand for. It's about helping you improve on your unique selling point, on your objective and ambitions for internationalization. And fit for purpose is therefore key because it has to match. And again, that involves the reflection: where are we at? What are we good at? What are we maybe not so good at? And what really fits for our institution? And as in my introduction there, I'm working as a consultant, so I'm working with different institutions, and this is something I help a lot of institutions with in terms of strategy. You know, what do you stand for? What fits with your institution, and where do you want to go? So some strategic questions to really think about in this process as your institution potentially considers going through the Sequent process. I would say to start at the beginning and asking things like, what do we stand for? What is our unique selling point? Maybe an obvious question, but sometimes when I speak to universities, this point isn't clear. Or maybe it's clear that it's a very, there are great ambitions to be international, but is that in the strategy? Is that in the policy? Is it documented? And does everybody know? Is it shared with the academic community? And also, again, what are we good at? What are we maybe not so good at? So these are big questions, but they are also leading to strategic decisions. And of course, that's a good example, maybe to build on the strengths. Maybe it's recruitment, maybe it's establishing partnerships in a certain geographic part of the world. Maybe it's sending students on exchange or receiving students in. But this is something you have to really think about, assess and make a decision on for your institution. It's also an opportunity to look at where to grow, develop, or change direction. So these are really the questions at a strategic level. Where are we headed? How have we been doing? How committed are we to internationalization and quality? And this is important because I often speak to, again, institutions and staff at different levels. They might be extremely passionate about internationalization and committed in their program or their department or their institute. But maybe if the management or the senior leadership are not on board, that could pose a challenge. Or the other way around, the senior leadership are really pro-internationalization and quality, but let's say throughout the community, it's not living. So these are the kind of questions. And then leading into the framework or the process of Sequent, we were brought to questions like, is this feasible and is it measurable, right? So you might have great strategic ideas, but can you deliver on them? Can you monitor them? Can you enhance them, measure them? Do you have the systems and tools in place? And that's really the next stage of Sequent if we think back to the 5 standards that I've just shared. So a second perspective, I think key is to really have clear strategic goals for internationalization. Leadership needs to be on board. I think this is really key. Not that it has to be a top-down approach, but I think there needs to be a commitment from the leadership to really drive this forward. And that helps then to engage the greater academic community at the different levels, as was my experience at Maastricht University, a university extremely committed to internationalization. But these are maybe just 3 bullet points, but really crucial, I would say, to a successful sequent certification. And then just to speak briefly about Maastricht, so it's a young university. I would definitely say internationalization is kind of in the DNA, and the institution was established with internationalization firmly on its radar back in the early 70s. So it's an institution that's kind of born international and developed in this way. So teaching a first English program, for example, in the early 90s, which brings it to almost 30 years experience of teaching in English. So that then links to the quality and experience in this area, for example, as opposed to an institution that might be still deciding to switch to teaching in English, for example. So Maastricht, very international, great strategy, clear goals, investment in staff, investment in resources. And this is really throughout the strategy, from partnerships to very international programs with a strong focus on intercultural, international learning outcomes. And really, I suppose, a topic that is alive in the institution among the academic community, the students, the staff. So it really is, yes, I would say quite unique actually in this sense. And then leadership, very dedicated, so that helps. There's effective leadership. There's a vision, a strategy, and that helps to get everybody then on board. There's awareness, commitment, and drive. So just some examples, about 20,000 students, almost half international, and about 40% international scientific staff. Key projects, international classroom, learning outcomes, as I've mentioned, and the idea of this intercultural experience. And this is, I'm also aware, as I say, from working with various clients that and various universities, that many universities are at different stages of internationalization, and Maastricht is certainly leading in this area. So I want to share that example, but I want to reiterate that Sequent is about measuring your success of your institution based on your institution's ambitions and based on what your institution has made as fit for purpose. But this inclusive approach, everybody on board from a senior leadership level to the students from all over the Netherlands or the world, really helps to bring this awareness, commitment to internationalization, and also to quality and data. So in terms of my role in managing a Sequent institutional level accreditation, and I also want to mention I've been on the other side, so I've managed Sequent certification, but I've also been an auditor in looking at an institution's performance on internationalization quality. But I thought it's helpful maybe to give some examples in our session today on my role and the more practical side in running or coordinating a Sequent certification. So my role would have, over a 2-year period, involved identifying the key stakeholders inside the organization, external stakeholders, which is a key aspect of Sequent as well in the framework, if you dare to read through all the details. Managing, allocating resources, budget, people, right, who's going to be involved, which projects are, because Maastricht is so international, there was plenty of options to highlight. So that was something I was looking at, which projects should be highlighted, for example, or shared in the report and the process. Establishing a project team, roles and responsibilities, and really organizing a focus groups, information and feedback sessions. So I would say in the case of Maastricht, because internationalization is so alive there, with a very inclusive approach to strategic development, I really built on this from a quality perspective. So the institution regularly brought groups together to look at the strategy, to help define it, to hear what people had to say. And then in building on this approach, this is how I approach Sequent. So I was doing focus group sessions, information sessions, asking people, internationalization is great, but so is quality. So trying to link these two key pillars. And then, of course, assessing all the policies. So anything that touched on internationalization, which was quite vast, from a central level to a faculty level. And then these action plans that I've mentioned. So you have your strategy, you know what you're about, vision, mission, but then do you have these action plans, policies that are then helping you implement your strategy for internationalization? And lastly, yes, ensuring this awareness and alignment. So that's as I've explained, I've kind of, in my position, I tried to build on the great internationalization energy with quality to bring this sequent process forward. So then a fourth example, as we move through this process, for those of you at the various stages, a fourth perspective I wanted to give was sequent as an opportunity to delve into data. So this is really important because strategy obviously is important, and I'm passionate about strategy for internationalization, but the data is really a foundation, right? Because the data can help you answer some of these strategic questions that I mentioned at the start. But it can also help you define, develop your strategy, and maybe change direction completely, that you find something in the data that you strategically were not aware of, but you could build on. Like, for example, a country that you have particularly strong partnerships with, or a country that you see a good number of international students coming in from, but you're maybe not targeting, for example. So the data can tell you things you didn't know, and that can be good and bad, but I think it's definitely worth to do this process and to look into the data, to delve in and see what's happening at your institution, either to guide you or to help you bring your strategy forward that you may already have defined. So just moving towards wrapping up, because I'm conscious of having time for questions within our breakout session here. But so Sequent will help to identify these data points, and Sequent does involve a number of mandatory documents as part of the process. So there are 10 key documents that are required as part of the process. And that really, those documents, which I have some slides at the end if you do wish to see, they really help you and also push you to do this delving into data. And it's things like student numbers, incoming, outgoing. There's a big long list, but I can share that at the end if you're interested to see that. And then the last point is really perspective 5. So I've given these perspectives based on the standards that I mentioned, the 5 main standards that I mentioned at the start of my presentation. And the governance, so I kind of have described this as the glue, right? So you've got your strategy, your data, your action plans, ideally, right? This is the ideal world of Sequent. And the governance is kind of bringing it all together, right? So it's the glue, it holds it together. Everything should be defined, documented, and shared. This is very important. You could have it documented, but if nobody knows about it or nobody's reading it, what good is that for a policy or an action plan, for example? So in Maastricht, we worked a lot on a governance model, something I helped to develop, which I think was very valuable in terms of having a central governance system for internationalization with all the key stakeholders at the table, at the meetings, making decisions or helping guide decision-making process for internationalization, and really having a regular review of the policies and the programs, again, with the right people, because these aspects, they're very familiar to me because I went through this process, but I see the value of having these kind of things in place, like the right people. And as you dig into roles, responsibility, you see a lot of things between maybe a title doesn't actually represent what the person is doing or what you need to know from a certain group or person. So this is just an example, the governance really pulling it all together. And so it is a lot of work, but I think it's worth it in the end. Just to maybe close on some challenges and lessons learned, I would say the challenges are that an institutional certification is large, right? So it's large depending on the size of your institution, but it's an organizational structure, a large scale project, multiple internal and external stakeholders, and just to even start to think about faculties and the departments and programs all built in. So it's a big project. Policy and practice may not be aligned, so you might have policy, as I mentioned, the paperwork there, but maybe nobody knows, or maybe it's not happening on the ground. This could be something to challenge your process of quality for internationalization. The third point there, data. So data is great if you dare to delve in, but it's big. So there's many data points, collection, analysis, usage, going always back to what do you stand for, what is your unique selling point, and that helps you to get through the data. And a last challenge I would say is that an audit can be seen as a confronting process. So people might think initially some panel is coming in and it's a confronting process, but as I've mentioned at the start of my presentation, Sequent is really aiming to assess, enhance and reward internationalization. So it's not about, it shouldn't be seen as a confronting process. So lastly, with just a couple of minutes to go, the lessons learned, well, obviously I am a fan, so I think it's a very valuable process to go through for this effective strategic leadership and operational excellence. I think it really helps to look at this aspect of running an institution successfully with internationalization. I think it's an opportunity to really reflect, as I mentioned again at the start, this idea of a self-evaluation report based again on your institution's goals and needs. And it's about rewarding the efforts at all levels of the institution, but also institutions that are at different stages of internationalization. Sequent looks to reward you for delivering on your own ambitions as an institution. And lastly, from my own experience, I would say lessons learned, the value of engaging the community and having an inclusive approach is just really something that I think brings this whole story to life of internationalization and quality. Because I think from my experience, I could see that people bring the strategy to life if you engage them enough in the process. I think for me, in terms of Maastricht, certainly during our audit week, I could really see the pride that my colleagues at all levels were taking in their work. And it was just really, really nice to see. But also because they were engaged in this process, right? So they knew what was kind of coming and how they could contribute. People are assets. And I think, when we start to talk about data, it can be quite daunting for a lot of people, but often it's people behind the data or behind the system. So again, this idea of engaging the community, I think, helps in that process regarding tools and systems. And lastly, I think a lesson learned that I would conclude on is really that, the community is the culture of quality and internationalization. So that's been a big learning curve for me in this process. So just to end there, I want to say thank you. And I think we have about 8 minutes for some questions, if there are any. I'd be happy to have any questions that might be there.
Thank you, Aisling, for the presentation. I picked up 2 questions from the chat in between, and I would like to bring them back to you. So the first question was, if you could give examples or good practices for enhancement. So how can enhancement work within an institution? Could you give an example for that?
So enhancement, I think maybe, I think the enhancement is having some processes in place, and enhancement may be an example of, okay, if I give an example, having a process in place, but maybe it's not running very smoothly. So by having a system or a tool, for example, might enhance an existing process that you have. Another example could be that you have a policy or process maybe documented, but staff, for example, are not aware. A way to enhance that might be to have an open information session where people are actually, the process is explained to them, and they can learn how to engage with it more actively. So it doesn't have to be drastic when we speak about enhancement, but it's really, I suppose, to try and improve what is maybe existing.
Okay, maybe to add, it doesn't mean that you have to offer incentives, but it is more on the level that you inform, that you raise the awareness, who can contribute to internationalization and who is involved, and by setting little steps where people can achieve the specific goals.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay. Aisling, there was a second question. You mentioned the governance model of Maastricht University, and the question was if eventually could share this governance model with the audience in a certain way.
Yeah, I probably could share some kind of overview. That will be possible. Basically, again, maybe going back to each institution, what would you want a governance model to show or to achieve? But I think certainly centralizing governance for internationalization is very helpful because it gives the insight, it gives the perspective, and as I mentioned, it makes sure that the right stakeholders are maybe at the table in the decision-making process. But I also think this is something unique to each institution, right? How would you develop that based on your needs or your intentions? But I can check if I can find some kind of an overview that might help as a starting point for institutions. Sure.
Okay, there's another question coming from the audience. Could you please say a few words about the accreditation process, the steps itself? How does it function? We could take that question also then later on to the audience, but maybe you could just can focus or give a few ideas on how it works, or how it had been done with Maastricht University.
Yeah, so the main steps being really the 5 standards that I've mentioned. These are kind of the baseline, and these are outlined in detail in the self-evaluation template. So for each, I've just given really bullet points, but under each point there is a lot more detail explaining exactly what is expected, like things, for example, like the impact on education of your teaching and learning would be in there. And I think basically, from Maastricht, I think in terms of how I manage the accreditation or the certification process, these standards were always kind of on the radar, on a presentation, but a lot of the process is working through this self-evaluation report. So I think, yeah, it's really happening simultaneously. I don't think you're really starting with, okay, we're only doing the first part and then we're only doing the last. I think it's all happening kind of, yeah, simultaneously. But the report as a tool is a great baseline from which to work. And that's really how I used it throughout the process at Maastricht.
Maybe I can add here from the perspective of the auditors and also from a perspective of a person that consults higher education institutions this process. What is so important is just the very beginning to sit down and reflect. What does internationalization mean to us? Why are we international? How do we interpret it? And then have a look at the standards and reflect on these standards and how they couple with what the institution actually does. So this institutional reflection is as very often the starting point, and then go through the standards and have a look in how far you can really live up to these standards and what is already happening. And if you really have this implemented internationalization as an institutional process and not only as a task of a few particular persons that work in the international sphere, but is it really implemented on the academic level, on the institutional level? How is it integrated into teaching and learning? So this, I think the most important issue and the first step is to start with an institutional reflection process and then go through the standards. And once you have done that and you have come to the conviction, yes, I would like to go for sequent, then you have to look for an agency that does it, and you have to apply and give also a timeline within which you intend to finish the report. What are your milestones in the process, etc. But the first thing is sit down and afford an institutional reflection where everyone who has a word in it really sits together and says, how do we see it? Why are we international? What does it mean to us? And which data do we have in order to give evidences? What evidences can we bring in whenever we talk about teaching and learning, about the environment, about, I don't know what, about staff and students? What are the key evidences that we can bring on the table when we then go for sequent? This is not just to make institutions afraid, but just to encourage them to start this reflection process right at the beginning.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, I have a look into the chat. There are no more questions for the moment, and I think, Aisling, we are very much on time.
Okay, good. So we'll be going, I think we will be brought automatically back to the main group, right?
Okay, wait a moment. There might be another question which I did not. Okay, I have here another question, Aisling. What is the striking argument for Sequent to convince both the B2B governments or the governments, the institution staff to run another extra mile, as well as the B2C prospective students, teachers, researchers, etc., as a target segment? So what is the argument, a striking argument for an institution to go for Sequent? Except to have another label on the website to put it very, very locally.
I think it's a great question, and I think that's also an interesting angle. Like for me, I don't think in going through the process, the driver was by any means only a certification or branding. It was, I think, really the benefit here is going through this process to have your strategy, your data, your operations in order. And I think that's really invaluable if we talk about quality of education and the student learning experience internationally. That would be a strategic question for any institution. What is your goal? Why are you going for Sequent? Is it just the paper that you want to say you have it? I think it's so much more than that. That is the argument I would give. It really can enhance the quality of international education.
Okay, thank you very much, Aisling. I think we have to leave, or we will be moved into the conference room in a few seconds.